All right, so please excuse the wind. I mean, it's Kansas. You can't help the wind around here, but valve cover removal on the 6.4 liter Powerstroke diesel engine. I'm going to go over the passenger side first and then the driver's side. All the relevant part numbers I mention here will be down below. The reason I mentioned valve cover removal is mainly because I had to replace the fuel rail pressure sensor on this, and it is on the passenger side. That is the right side valve cover. Okay, so that's what we're going to start with right now. Now, to remove the valve cover, you got to take a bunch of stuff off. You're just going to have to accept that right now. You got to take a bunch of stuff off. You don't got to raise the cab up or do anything like that. I mean, if you want to, you go right on ahead, because that'd make it about 10 times easier. But you can get to it leaving the cab on. It's not the worst thing in the world. The first thing you got to take out is the battery. You also have to remove the air cleaner. Now, the air cleaner, I mean, you've got this secondary air intake that runs here. The air cleaner itself just sits on this bracket down there, and it's held in by these three like little, I don't know, fingers. I don't know what you would call them. It essentially just snaps into these rubber grommets down there. So get this disconnected and unscrew it from here and just rip it out. I mean, it'll just come right out. And then, yeah, take the battery out. You're going to have to disconnect like this and this and this, and you're going to have to disconnect a whole bunch of other stuff along the way. But once you have your air cleaner removed, you'll be able to see in here a lot better. You'll have to take out the battery box, which is right here, and it's also your windshield wiper fluid reservoir. It's all tied together. So if your wiper fluid reservoir is full, you're going to have to empty it somehow. It doesn't work on this because the hose is disconnected. So on here, it's always empty. It's always dry. If it's full for you, you're probably going to want to empty it. I don't know how you're going to do that. I don't know. Or you could just rip it out while it's full. Completely up to you. To get the battery box out, there are two bolts that go here, and there's another one. There's one here, and then there's one. Oh, that's the other side. I'm sorry. There's one bolt up here on top. There's two bolts underneath the battery, and then there's another bolt that goes right down in there. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's right down in there. Now, that bolt that goes down in here also attaches to, I mean, it holds the bracket in that holds your air cleaner on. So that bracket attaches here, and then there's another bolt that holds that bracket in right back in here somewhere. You'll see it. It is a funky looking bracket. That'll have to come out too. But you'll need to remove this one bolt that goes on that bracket. It attaches here because it also screws into the battery box. So you'll need to get that bolt, the two under the battery, and the one there out. Once you've got that out, you should be able to maneuver the battery box out. There is also this air conditioner line. It clips in right here. Just take a pry bar and pop it out. It just snaps into a piece of plastic on the box here. That way this air conditioning line will be flexible. You can move it out of the way. When you pull the battery box out, your windshield wiper fluid reservoir is going to be connected by, of course, a hose and also an electrical connector. And they're all towards the front right here. You kind of have to move this around and, you know, manipulate the controls a little bit, you know what I'm saying, to kind of get this out of here. It's not the worst, but you want to unplug that connector, pull that wiper line off. If your reservoir is full of fluid, that's going to make it more fun. I don't know what that's like because, like I said, this thing's always dry. So once you have all of that out of the way, you're not even close to being done, so don't think you are. This has to come off right here. This goes to your powertrain control module, I believe. Usually there's a little red handle on here, like on that one, and you're supposed to like pry it, and it shoves these tabs out, and then you can pull it off. I broke that, and it's easy to break. If you go gentle, and as you pull on that, if you're kicking those tabs out, if you grab onto them with the pair of pliers and kind of help pull them out that way, you can get it loose. And there's one tab that goes up here, and then there's one down below that you won't be able to see. To pull the secondary air intake out of your way, it just clips on like right there, and then it just goes in here. Just pull it out. Once you have all that out of the way, it's going to look a lot better in here. You're going to be able to see what you're doing some more. You'll need to pull the oil fill and the intake boot that goes to the turbo. You have to pull all that off. It's not bad to do. Just make sure when you pull all of this off that you stuff a rag over where this attaches to the valve cover, because all the motor oil you add to the engine, it goes into that valve cover and then it drifts down into the crankcase. So you want to cover the hole you make here with a rag, and you'll definitely want to cover the turbocharger with a rag just to help keep dirt out of it. And don't forget to pull that rag back out when you're done. Certain people around here have made that mistake, and yeah, your pickup's not going to run right if you got that rag in there. Once you have all this out of the way, I mean, you'll have that disconnected, you'll have all this off, you're going to have to disconnect some other stuff. On the bottom of this oil fill, there is an oil drain back tube. It's a little elbow. It sticks on the bottom. It's got a clamp on it, one of them spring clamps. Pull that elbow off. That line is easy to break, but it's also easy to fix. I mean, it's not on there it's a drain tube. It's not really under pressure. You just have to make sure it's kind of sealed so it doesn't leak oil everywhere. It's pretty easy to fix. You'll see what I mean when you get in there. The final couple things you have to disconnect and take off. Way back, I'm going to try and get you guys in there so you can see. Way back in there, see that green connector right there? There is, behind that cord, there's a metal box looking thing, okay? That is your glow plug control module. There are two connectors. There's that green one, and then there's also like a white one or a brown one or something in there. They suck to get off, but you'll have to get them off, and you'll have to take that box out. That box has, I'm trying to think here, it's been a few weeks since I did this. That box has 3 bolts. One's back towards the turbo that way, and then there's one clear back behind towards the firewall, and then there's one out in front. You'll just have to get your hand in there and feel around. It does sit on a bracket. The box does sit on a bracket, so you want to take it off that bracket, and then once you got the bracket loose, well, it attaches to a couple other things. There's a heater hose that runs in here and goes into, your heater core, and there's some bolts in there that hold other things on. When you get in here, you'll see what I'm talking about. The original video I took of me removing the valve cover and getting all this out, the footage was so bad I couldn't even stand to use it. I procrastinated for so long on editing the damn thing that when I finally got around to finishing it, because it just bothered me so much, I had to get it done. What I put together was horrible, and so that's why I'm doing this. So no, you're not going to see me take all this stuff out. I've had it out of here a dozen times already. I'm tired of doing it, because we just got done putting turbochargers in this too, so I'm not anxious to take all this out again. But when you get in here, you will see what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to give you a few pointers so that you understand what all is involved with this. Taking the valve cover off is kind of a pain, but it's not one of those end-of-the-world repairs where it's like, oh my gosh, you got to be in a sealed shop. I thought originally you did. You don't. You can do this under a freaking shade tree. As long as there's not dust pouring in here, you're fine. So anyway, you get all this out of here, you get that glow plug module out, and you'll disconnect the obvious electrical connectors along the way. You'll see it. The glow plug harness sits on the bottom of the valve cover on this side. There are little rubber grommets that go into these holes and seal everything in. You'll want to get into the screwdriver and just maneuver those things out, pop them out, and then you can just pull those glow plug connectors right out. They come out real easy. Back here towards the firewall, because you have your firewall, you have your AC can in the way. It does make it a little difficult to get to stuff. There are a whole bunch of bolts on the valve cover you got to take off, and you get them loose, they are all held onto the valve cover. They're all retained on there, okay? So you don't have to worry about like getting them loose and pulling them all the way out, because they've got those little retaining metal washers on there. They're not going to fall out, okay? You get all those off, you can break the valve cover loose and maneuver it on out of here. I would advise you come in here and wash this engine if you can. Get in here and blow all the dirt off the valve cover that you possibly can, especially around where, okay, like down in there, that's where the valve cover meets. Right there off the end of my thumb, that little split there, that's where the valve cover meets the engine, the head on the engine. That little gap in there likes to hold dirt, so get in there and blow that out real good. Just clean it up good and take your time, and you can get all this off. You get that removed. Your fuel rail pressure sensor is right between let me think here. Okay, so on this side, it's number 1, 2, 3, and 4 cylinder. Your fuel rail pressure sensor is between number 2 and 3 injector. All right, it just sits like, you know, it kind of sits in the middle of it all towards the front. It's not hard to get to. You'll need an 1 1/16 socket to pull it off. A deep well 1 1/16 socket. So you get in there, you pull it off, and then you can put the new one in. Part number will be in the description for that sensor. You'll have to disconnect. In order to get one of the bolts off that holds the valve cover on, you'll have to take a nut that retains this transmission dipstick tube off. Once you get that loose, just pull it off that stud so it flops around a little bit and get out of your way. You won't hurt it any. Just don't go yanking on it too hard, but just you can move it out of your way and it'll be fine. You won't break it or anything. So you get all that off, you get your valve cover off, you get your fuel rail pressure sensor replaced. One of the things you might run into, and this is important, you might break off the pigtail that plugs into that sensor. It's all part of the fuel injection harness. Now you can still buy that harness. You can't get it from Ford. You can get it from Dorman. The part number for that will be in the description as well. You can just buy the whole new harness and put on there. You'll have to stick the power end of it up through there. There's just a couple tabs on that piece. You squeeze them in and then you can shove them back down into the head of the engine where the valve train's at, and you can put the new one in. It's not hard to do. I'm sorry about the light. It's a bad time of morning for me to be doing this. But anyway, you can get the fuel injection wiring harness if you break that off. You might be wondering, well, can't I just get a pigtail that splices into that harness and I can then plug into the sensor? I think you can, but it's hard to find. I found it when I was doing this originally, and I broke that off. I was looking for a pigtail. I spent hours looking for it. I found one. It was $35, $40, something like that. The harness from Dorman, this is through Rock Auto, of course, because where else would you get your parts? It was it was pretty much $100 on Rock Auto for that. And I figured I'd rather go back in with a brand new harness and make sure that everything's okay than trying to get in here and splice everything on. Because when I pulled the old harness out to replace it with the new one, I broke off all the retaining tabs on the injector plug-ins as well. So my opinion, you're better off to replace the whole injection harness if you run into this situation. At the end of the day, it's your truck. You do what you want. I'm just giving you my advice, my opinion, my experience. So then when you get done, you just put everything back on, snug it up pretty good. I did buy a manual, so I have all the torque specifications. I don't know if I'll put them down below or not. That's a lot of writing. We'll see how I feel. But that's how you get the valve cover off, replace your fuel pressure sensor. That's not hard to do. You go over here to the driver's side, and I did forget to mention, on the passenger side, you will have to drain a bunch of the coolant out just because you're going to have to disconnect some heater hoses. It doesn't matter what side you're working on. You're going to have to disconnect some heater hoses. So to do the driver's side, it's pretty much the same process. Drain the coolant, pull the battery out. On this side, you have 2 bolts. Here and here, and yeah, there. You have 2 underneath. There's just 4 bolts that hold this battery box in, and then it comes out. This comes with it. Now this side's a little more difficult because you have to disconnect a whole bunch of cooling hoses. So you'll have to take this hose off. You'll have to disconnect these 2 hoses that go to your fuel cooler. Your fuel cooler is a separate unit from the rest of your cooling system. It takes its own fluid and everything. I don't know why. I really don't. So you have to disconnect this hose from the cooler, this hose from the turbo actuator. Down in here, you want to disconnect that hose. Down in here, I'm going to try and show you. You can't really see it, and it's hard to see. Basically, on the bottom of this degas bottle, coolant tank, whatever you want to call it, on the bottom, there is a special hose that runs around from what I believe is the water pump. It about has to be the water pump. So it runs from the water pump, and it curls around, and it hooks onto this. It's retained with one of those stupid clips. It looks like a hairpin that's extra wide, you know? And it's the same style of clip that holds this hose onto the radiator. It's a stupid system, and it's going to infuriate you to get them off, and it's going to infuriate you to get them back on. Because what they do is, and I'll show you on a little bit on this one, it snaps into a little groove right there. Okay, now this one's loose, and that's the retardedness of it. It doesn't have to be on there super tight. It's just supposed to stop you from being able to rip the hose off. I cannot emphasize how stupid it is, but that's the way they did it. So each end of those little hairpin each end on those hairpin clips fits into these little grooves here. Now this one, that's not too bad, but now you got to do it on the underside on this hose where you cannot see, and it's the same principle down here. I don't know where to get those clips, so don't lose them, don't bend them, don't break them. If you bend them, you can bend them back and probably make them work. You could probably fashion something else to work if you were desperate, but just don't lose the damn clips, because I don't know if you can get them. I don't know where you can get them, because I looked. The little hose that's down there does sometimes leak. You can get that hose part from Ford. It is expensive, but I do have the part number, and I believe you could still get it anyway. We could get it a couple years ago. So, anyway, back to the valve cover. I'm sorry. You got to maneuver all this stuff out of the way. You'll figure it out as you go along. You'll have to manipulate these hoses in order to get enough room to see, to get everything off. It's a nightmare. And here's something I'm going to tell you right now. No matter how much fluid you drain out of this goddamn degas bottle, there's always going to be some left, and you are always going to spill it, so just accept it. Just have rags around. You're always going to spill fluid out of this. It doesn't matter how many times you dump it. It doesn't matter how you drain it. It doesn't matter what you take off or hook up first. There's always going to be coolant in this that you're going to spill. So just know that. You're going to make a mess. To drain the coolant, which I should probably mention before I forget, to drain the coolant, you got to come down here. It's right. Oh, come on now. Where is it? I got to get down on the ground here so I can show you. All right, it's right there. I got to be able to see. It's right in there. The camera would focus. Right? And the sun's in my eyes. All right, look. It's right there. It's right there. That nut right there, you open that, drains coolant out. What an ordeal to show you that. The sun just got right in my eye. I couldn't see that part of the camera. That's where you drain the coolant at. Now, you want to take that lid off, of course, too, to make it drain faster. All right, so once you have all this off, and all this is out of the way, to get the valve cover off, you have to disconnect the back pressure sensor, which is back there. It attaches down to the exhaust manifold down there. You can kind of, no, you can't see it. It's too dark. But you have to disconnect the back pressure sensor, unplug that, get that wire out of the way. You have to disconnect the oil dipstick tube, and once this battery box and degas bottle is out of the way, you'll see what I'm talking about. You'll have to take the fuel cooler off as well. Now, the fuel cooler, you take it off as an assembly, which means you take this off, you take this pipe that goes underneath it. It basically takes air from here and kicks it around into that turbo. So nothing fancy in there. There are a couple seals. The gasket kit I put in the description will have all the seals you need to replace both valve covers on this, okay? So you remove the fuel cooler as an assembly. There are 2 bolts up top. There's one here. There's one back there. It's the same, well, there's 2 nuts. There's a nut here and a nut there. On this side, it's the same nut that holds the top of the back pressure sensor tube in. And then on the bottom, you have 3 nuts. One holds the oil dipstick tube on. The other 2 are just to help hold the assembly on. And then there's another nut behind the one on the oil dipstick tube that retains this bracket. So the way they did it, you got 3 studs. You put this assembly on. You put 3 nuts on to hold it. You put the oil dipstick tube on up here, and then you put another nut to hold the tube on. All right. Once you have all that loose and you have all these hoses and stuff disconnected, this assembly you should be able to wiggle it out. You'll have to disconnect that fuel line right here, right there, and you'll have to disconnect that fuel line right there too. And of course, that little coolant tube, excuse me, you have to disconnect all that. You get all that off, you can get in here, wiggle this loose, pull it off. Stuff a rag in your turbo there and your other line here. There is a cross pipe that runs, and it's hard to show you anything in this damn engine, but on this side of that U-shaped pipe, there's a seal, and then there's a extension pipe that goes from here over to there, and that connects into that turbo. And the seals, like I said, will come in the gasket kit. There is a seal that is already pressed in on that turbo. You don't have to worry about replacing it. But on this U-shaped piece that is part of this fuel cooler assembly, there are 2 seals, and they send both of them in the gasket kit that I will list. And you can get all this stuff pretty much at Rock Auto. You know, it's not horrible. I think the gasket kit for everything was $60. But anyway, once you get the fuel cooler off, the back pressure sensor's out of the way. This degas bottle and the battery box will be out of the way. You should have more than enough room to get in here and remove this valve cover. You shouldn't have any trouble with it. It's easier to get to this side, mainly because you can get to these back bolts a lot easier. It's not an amazing amount of room, but it's enough that you can get in there and do it without too much trouble. So again, I'm sorry there's not better video of me doing this, but it's so hard to film anything when you're working on this because, I mean, look at this. This is a mess. It's all packed in here. How am I supposed to get a camera in here and show you guys what to do and do it at the same time? Especially when I am pressed for time most days. So that's how you get all of that off. If there's anything I forgot, it should become evident what you need to remove as you get all of this off. Like I said, this video is just to give you some pointers on what to do so that you're not completely clueless. If you've never done this before, don't be intimidated by it. Just come in here, take your time, drain plenty of antifreeze out. There's no such thing as draining too much antifreeze on this, so that none of your hoses and whatever leak. And then, you know, you're going to have the right parts. They'll all be in the description. And you can get them, and you can change your valve cover, gaskets out, if for whatever reason you need to get in here and do that. And the rest of it will become pretty well self-explanatory. As a final note, 2 final things that I will mention. The first thing is, just buy a manual for this. You can get them on eBay. You can get like a USB version for, I don't know, 20, 30 bucks, something like that. It's worth the money. If you're going to do any work on this pickup outside of basic maintenance, I highly advise you find yourself a decent manual. That's going to help you tremendously. There's no shame in buying a manual. If for nothing else, then you want to make sure how everything comes off. You know, if you're looking at this and you're pretty sure you know how it comes off, just buy a manual so you make sure for certain and you know for certain. That way you're not tearing anything up. Most of the components on here are plastic. They're brittle. This particular engine has 265,000 miles on it. And you know, plastic gets brittle. That's the downside to plastic. It gets brittle and it breaks, and you don't want to do that. So take your time, make sure you know what you're doing, buy a manual, it's not going to hurt. Second thing is, I should have mentioned this in the beginning, your fuel pressure sensor, telltale sign of that going bad is it's going to throw a code. It's going to throw a P0087 code, I believe is the right code. I'll put the right one in the description regardless, but you're going to get that code, and it's going to throw your check engine light on, okay? You're going to get that code, and your cruise control won't work. And your cruise control is going to quit working probably before or at the same time it throws that code. So if your cruise control does not work and it throws that code, your fuel rail pressure sensor is bad, and you need to replace it. And you need to replace it pretty quickly because your engine will not run right, and it's just going to tear stuff up. So yeah, just do that. Keep all that in mind. If I forgot to mention anything else, I'll either put it in the description or in a pinned comment. And if you guys have any questions or you need any help, then you just leave a comment, let me know, and I will do my darndest to help you out. Because look, these engines suck. I don't like them, but 18 miles a gallon is what this thing gets. Fuel economy. And when diesel is $5.50 a gallon, that's, you know, that makes a difference. And this is, and the other side of it is, you know, you have this, you want to get rid of it. Well, let me ask you this. What are you going to replace it with? You got to have diesel to pull. Gasoline won't pull like this thing will. When this is running right, it pulls like a son of a bitch. I mean, really, it does. But when it's running right, that's the catch-all right there. And then again, like I said, you know, what are you going to replace it with? Are you going to replace it with a 6-liter? Well, that's a whole new set of problems. You're going to replace it with a 7.3? Well, you get a 7.3, those things are worn out. You got to rebuild them before you can use them. And they're not going to get as good a power as these do. They're going to be more reliable, but they're not going to get as good a power as these 6.4s. So here's the other thing. You might think, well, I'll just go get a 6.7. Well, that's a whole other ballpark of issues you got to screw with. You know, and that's if you're wanting to go to Ford. I mean, if you're wanting to go somewhere else, you're trading... You're going to have problems no matter what. It's either going to be engine problems, it's going to be transmission problems, it's going to be frame and axle problems. It's going to be one thing or another. So you got to pick the problems you want. If you're going to have this engine, you might as well know how to work on it. You might as well do it right. So just buy the manual. You have the part numbers. So hopefully I saved you some time looking for part numbers, if nothing else. And you can do this repair yourself. It's not bad to do. It doesn't require anything extensive. So I highly advise you to do your own repair here. I used to think this was a complete process. You had to have a mechanic do it. You know, oh my gosh, if you get any dirt in here, it's just going to destroy the engine. It ain't going to matter. Just clean up the dirt you get in the valve train. You know, make sure it's clean. Keep stuff clean as you can while you're doing it. And you'll be fine. So yeah, I was definitely wrong about that. This is... You got to do it. You got to do it. I can't afford to take this to a mechanic. You probably can't either. That's why you're doing this. So just do it. It's not the end of the world. Just keep it clean. Do the best you can. Cover it with a rag. If you're not going to work on it for a little bit, just cover it with a rag so dirt doesn't get in there. Just take your time. And yeah, you can get her done. So it's not a quick repair on either side, no matter what. It's not a quick thing. But you can do it. So don't be afraid of it, because I was completely wrong. There's no reason to be scared of this. It is irritating, but you can do it. So good luck with repairing this. Like I said, if you need help, leave a comment. Let me know. I'll do my best to help you. And I wish you luck in your future endeavors.